The biggest win, the biggest change of this year is acceptance. I still think that a year ago, there were still elements of the political class that thought that they could either contain or restrict or put this industry in a bottle or in some kind of corner. But you can't, as you know, you can't put Bitcoin in a corner. I mean, imagine a year ago, the idea of sitting in a U.S. Senator's office with their staff and talking about the nature of consensus, about soft forks. That's amazing.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Bitcoin Policy Hour. We've got our last Bitcoin Policy Hour of the year, so we've got a good couple of topics to cover. Do a little looking back at 2025 and looking ahead to 2026. But before we jump into it, gonna introduce the guys as usual. We've got Zack Shapiro, BPI's head of policy, Ken Egan, BPI's director of government affairs, and
So,
Stephen Pollock, the senior vice president of advancement. Gentlemen, thanks for joining as always. And a quick note for everybody, if you have not already hit subscribe, we do ask that you do so. It really helps us out trying to grow the channel, making sure you all get the content as it comes out. So yeah, let's jump into this. I guess we'll just go through each of you. I guess first question for the day is what do you think the single most important advancement that happened in 2025 was thinking particularly about the work that we're doing at BPI, what's going on in DC, all that good stuff. Steven, you want to kick us off here?
Sure, sure. I don't know that it's well, okay, I'll start with I get to go first, so I get to take the easy one, I guess. I'm and I was thinking about this, we were talking about this the other day, and it seems like this was like 2 or 3 years ago, but the SBR, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, that was 2025. That seems like so much has happened since then, and we've come so far, but I think the executive order establishing a Strategic Bitcoin Reserve is the biggest win of 2025. And I think a lot of everything else we're going to talk about, a lot of the other wins, a lot of the other things that have happened, not just with BPI, but like inside of Bitcoin and politics and the entire arena, the entire universe there is all flowing from that moment when a president signed an executive order. So I'll take that one. Sorry, guys. I got to go first, and yeah, I just think I think it's a historic win.
Ken, you want to go for it?
yeah, for me, it's more sort of big picture. I think the biggest win, the biggest change of this year is acceptance. I still think that a year ago, there were still elements of the political class that thought that they could either contain or restrict or put this industry in a bottle or in some kind of corner. But you can't, as you know, you can't put Bitcoin in a corner. Nobody puts Bitcoin in a corner. I think I'm a Gen Xer. No one puts Bitcoin in a corner. But I think that is the not putting Bitcoin in a corner is actually the fundamental shift in perspective, certainly on the policy side, and even the financial system side. So I mean, we can look back to a slew of sort of legislative wins that were sort of digital asset friendly, Genius Act, even market structure, which sort of plods its way through sort of the swamp of like congressional negotiation. There's no real debate about whether it passes or not. It's the function of what it looks like. So I think the political class has accepted that this industry is here to stay, and it has a role to play in the future of our economy. But I think the bigger shift is it's not. Yes, I said this a couple months ago, and it drives you crazy that Larry Fink was like the big corner of 24 because he was like the first like TradFi guy to jump in and say this asset matters. But here we go to the last quarter of 2025, and you've got Morgan Stanley, which next year will be letting you buy not IBIT, we buy IBIT in your E-Trade account, but also Bitcoin. Vanguard, like the staunchiest, the last of the conservative institutions in Wall Street, who are now letting people buy IBIT. Like that's a tremendous change. And it's great. All the capital is wonderful, and people say, "Well, why is the price moving?" That's the point. The point is that there's been broad acceptance across policy, across financial institutions, across regulators that this industry is here to stay. It has value, and it plays a role in how ordinary Americans construct their portfolios and their savings. That for me is like I think this is the 24 is a great victory because I think the industry at large. I don't give like even the crypto folks a little bit of credit for last year. For that was the yes, we're here. Like you better listen to us, and that change happened. But I think that now we are 2 weeks out from the end of the 2025, and there is, and I don't think it, I know it. There is broad consensus among Republicans, Democrats, regulators, industry that it's not just that we will tolerate it, that this industry has value and it serves a role. And it plays a role in the economy, it plays a role in people's savings, it plays a role in their portfolios. For me, I mean, funny how what a year does, right? But a year ago, that was not the case. The year we knew it was going to be a good year, but I think the sort of the breadth of the acceptance is remarkable. And for me, that's the big win for just 25.
All right, Zach, round us out.
I'm going to say the strategic Bitcoin reserve. I agree with Stephen. I think that was the sort of single biggest story of the year. I think it's also probably the worst understood story. I think the story about the strategic Bitcoin reserve is a story about a shifting Overton window. It's about the United States government holding Bitcoin apart from the rest of crypto. It's about talking about Bitcoin as digital gold and sort of saying out loud in an official document that becomes law for as long as it stands that the United States thinks that Bitcoin is an important strategic asset to hold on our balance sheet. And I think that is the important part, right? The strategic Bitcoin reserve is not massive sovereign buys from the United States. That may or may not happen in the future. I mean, I think the massive sovereign buys will probably happen at a time where it is more obvious, right, that is the path we're headed on. Certainly, we are doing work on different budget neutral paths for the United States to accumulate more Bitcoin. We think that it's important for that to happen sooner rather than later, as far as the United States is concerned. But I think a lot of the sort of narrative out there with people who are disappointed by the SBR because it was not the same thing as like the Bitcoin Act, where we would buy 1 million Bitcoin, are really sort of missing how massive a step it was. And we should sort of calibrate our expectations to what happened over the last year.
Yeah, I don't want like the implication that I don't like the SBR. I don't want to be like the only one out. It's
Ken,
terrible.
you didn't want there to be an SBR. You said that to me.
You fought it. You're like,
You hate the SBR?
I agree with my friends and colleagues. No, I agree. I'm joking. No, but I think it's all part of the same narrative of general acceptance. And I will say that the one thing the SBR did across the board, or bipartisan regulators, is it did define a difference that between Bitcoin and crypto, and that was not self-evident, within recent memory. People get it now. So I think there's that in itself is a tremendous shift because people understand now, like regulators and lawmakers understand. Even those that don't really understand why this asset is important, they get that it's not crypto, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two sides to it, right? Ken, everybody's right here. We wouldn't be on the podcast if we weren't.
Yay!
Right. But a strategic Bitcoin reserve becoming reality requires the type of environment, Ken, that you were describing, right? And the sort of complete change in posture, and sort of the internal mechanisms of the U.S. government, and sort of the dawning of a new reality on not just a president, but on a lot of other people, and on constituencies that got him into office, and all of the forces, sort of market forces, political market forces that caused that. And then I think the bat signal of a strategic Bitcoin reserve just hits the gas pedal on all of that as well. It sort of lets everyone know, hey, it's a new day. Here's where it's at. Here's what's real. Here's what we really think. And I think for us as an organization, our mission statement is to guide America through the rise of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to do its thing, and we are hopeful that our country would be a beneficiary of that. Our country, and by our country, I mean not just Washington, D.C., but our entire country, the citizens, the millions and millions of people who live here and call it home, that they would all benefit from this as well, the rise of Bitcoin. Rather, the opposite of that, which would be that they don't, and that would be a negative, like massive net negative, right? And so when I see not just the strategic Bitcoin reserve, but the environmental 180 as a staffer for a U.S. senator here in Tennessee said Wednesday night, what they've seen the last year was a complete 180 in Washington, not a pivot, not a slightly different stance. I mean, we were talking about an just a completely different new reality when it comes to Bitcoin and an understanding of that and an approach to that and thoughtful. And so I think it's all it's kind of part of the same pie. Really, we can kind of joke about which is which, but I think, man, it's really fantastic and just really fun to look back in the rearview mirror. This was all not that long ago. It feels like it's been years. I don't know if it's the same for you, but somebody was like, yeah, I think kind of the big thing this year was the SBR. I was like, that had to have been 2 years ago. It's
Dude,
wild.
I had no gray hair like last December, and like here I am in December 2025, and I'm just kidding. I had some gray hair back then.
The other two positive things we saw this year, I mean, both of them are a continuation of things from previous years. There's especially in finance, there's a different shift of the Overton window there. There's a mainstreaming of Bitcoin. I know not everyone in Bitcoin loves that. But it's been really remarkable for me to see just like the career risk around Bitcoin going away. I think 2025 is the year that like my sort of normie family and friends all actually bought Bitcoin for the first time. Many of them did it through the ETF. I think the ETF is really the sort of uh, proximate cause that got all of this moving that happened at the beginning of last year. But this year, it's like you're seeing the full effect of the Bitcoin thesis being taken seriously rather than just sort of universally scoffed at. And so that's been really notable this year. There's a similar thing happening in government as Stephen mentioned. And a lot of our highlights are just the different types of conversations that we're having with policymakers where they just are taking this seriously, and they're interacting with Bitcoin on a much more granular level than before, rather than saying we want to, like we collectively roll our eyes every time we hear the word protect and foster innovation, because like that's a clear sign that someone in DC has no idea what they're talking about. And we're hearing much, much less of that and more like actually sort of interacting with the idea of Bitcoin and what can we use it, what can we leverage it for. And so that's like a really big positive thing. And then, I think the sort of Bitcoin and crypto industry having flexed its political muscle at the end of last year, it's just easier to have our voices heard. And I think that's sort of another like story about the SBR, other than the sort of Overton window shift, is the like people are listening to us now in a way they haven't.
The thing I was just going to add, and I think, one step even beyond the acceptance sort of narrative, and this goes along with what Zach was saying, is there's almost like a curiosity that I think we experienced this year where, we went from people saying, hey, we want to like foster this innovation, we want Bitcoin to like be around, we want to support your industry, right? And those are all just kind of like empty things that they're saying. And I think this was the year where people were like, hey, I'm interested in this Bitcoin thing and I want to learn more. And Ken, like people are coming to you with very specific questions about very specific things related to Bitcoin, um, which is just, has not been true in the past, only probably to the extent that there was something in particular they were going after, right? Like, hey, I want to learn more about Bitcoin mining so that I can, maybe like make my colleagues think it's terrible, right? Like stuff like that. And I think this year it's like, hey, what are some budget neutral ways to acquire Bitcoin, right? Like those are very specific questions. That's where, an institute like BPI comes into play and says, hey, you have all these questions. You're ready to kind of hear the nuts and bolts from us, and we're going to provide it to you. This was something I was talking to Harry at CleanSpark about, early this week, which is, as one of the largest publicly traded mining companies in the United States, um, they've engaged with the Department of Energy. They've engaged with people in the administration and Congress. And, it shifted from like, hey, what are we doing wrong, to like, hey, how can we help you? And how can we better understand the business that you're building? And, you know, how do we kind of move things forward? Because we want you here in the United States. So yeah, Ken, I'm curious if you can kind of, put any color on that. That's just been sort of the trend that I feel like we've observed this year.
Yeah, I mean, a few examples. I mean, like, we don't dox the people we talk to, but a senator's office, for example. I mean, imagine a year ago, the idea of sitting in a U.S. senator's office with their staff and talking about the nature of consensus. about soft forks, about why is Bitcoin Cash called Bitcoin Cash? Who named it? How does that work? How does a fork work? What does that mean? Walk me through the interaction between miners and nodes and what that all means for sort of the network. In terms of when they're thinking about financial regulations. I mean, they're a staffer. I mean, this is still a minority of staffers, but I've had it's funny. I go to most meetings and prepare to talk about Bitcoin's freedom, and they're like, "Oh, walk me through why." Once in a while, now increasingly, I'll go to offices and I'll get Ken, walk me through consensus and soft forks and how that happens. And by the way, the block size wars. Walk me through what happened there. That's amazing. I mean, it's just it's hard to get your head around the fact that I've having that discussion in an influential congressional office on Capitol Hill, and these are educated questions, right? I mean, they don't have all the answers, but educated questions. Um, and the other side, talking to executive agencies about mining pools. And, Ken, if walk me through how a mining pool works, and is it frictionless to shift your hash rate in the mining pool? And does it matter if there are certain kinds of machines in a mining pool? How does that work? And do you have to be in the country to be in all these sorts of things that we are so far ahead of where we were just in understanding. And the fact is they don't necessarily understand it all, but that's okay. But when I'm getting a lot of educated questions. I mean, imagine sitting in the congressional office and you're talking about the block size wars and why that mattered and what that meant and what's a soft fork. And just a basic question: who named Bitcoin Cash? Why is it Bitcoin Cash? Did Coinbase name it? Did the people name it? Is there a head of Bitcoin Cash? That's crazy. I mean, you think back to a year ago. So it shows you the level of knowledge, and then and it's not uniform, but it never is uniform. But in the offices, the decision makers who care about this enough to think about it, this is the kind of questions their staff are asking. So it shows they're doing their homework. I'm not the only person they're talking to, and I have enough faith in sort of what Bitcoin is, and I'm quite comfortable and confident, pitching, talking, pleading our case. But they're asking these questions. That is a radical shift. And also, like maybe 18 months ago, nobody talked about the debasement trade, fiat currency. I mean, 2 years ago, if you were able to like, go back in the Wayback Machine, look at Google searches for fiat, 2 years ago, no one talked about fiat. But that debasement fiat discussion is 100% Bitcoin driven. I'll give the gold people a little bit of credit too. Fine. But it's just partial of the same question. What is happening to money? And there is a growing cadre in the national security establishment of people thinking about monetary competition because they never had to think about it before. It's been very easy to be, a person in OFAC or wherever, and you did your career, and you had your hand on the dials of the dollar, and it was easy and it was amazing. That's no longer the case, and people are starting to ask questions about that. So when I speak about sort of the Overton window shifting and the sort of the general acceptance, it's all part of the same discussion that Bitcoin really has redefined the terms of discussion. And again, I do give the gold people get some credit because the Chinese are buying a lot of gold, and people are asking, well, why are they buying so much gold? But the gold story really is the same as Bitcoin, as the Bitcoin story. I think Bitcoin's a better alternative, but the narrative is the same. The sort of the backstory is the same story, and there is a lot of educated discussion about that in Washington right now, which is crazy different than it was 2 years ago. And so we walk into 2026, and I think 2026 will be the year where policymakers really grasp with monetary competition. And BPI, we have some ideas we're thinking about what that means, and ideas that I think would be advantageous to the United States and advantageous to Bitcoin, because at the core, I think Bitcoin's advantageous for America. But this is the nature of discussion in Washington right now, and it's a radical departure from where we were a year ago, but certainly 2 years ago. But even a year ago, about the nature of the discussion about Bitcoin and policy.
Yeah. Before we get to 2026, one thing that I guess one curiosity I have, and I'm curious y'all's thoughts on this. I think two things really kind of came to fruition in 2025. The first was that, these sort of like tech elite traditional finance circles really came around to Bitcoin, right? Just I guess it was earlier this week, the Fidelity CEO, she was up on stage. She said, I like Bitcoin. I own Bitcoin. Will play a role in the savings hierarchy. We've had other tech elites, folks in the AI world, talking about Bitcoin a lot, saying they like Bitcoin. Just this like full kind of like institutional stack, really coming around to Bitcoin, and at the same time, watching the U.S. government, the federal government, and state governments really come around to Bitcoin. And so the question here is which one came first? Which one enabled the other, or do they just sort of coincide randomly? Because I think you can kind of look at it either way.
I think the truth is a lot of these big tech and finance folks. I mean, finance I think has come to Bitcoin more recently. I think Elon's liked Bitcoin for a while. The CEO of Fidelity, they were early to this. They've been Bitcoin mining for a long time, and a lot of this is it's just it's easier to come out and say it than it was before. I do think we should actually maybe before we get to 26 touch on some of the bad parts of 25, right? Because
Sure.
I think there were a lot of things this year that like we didn't reach our potential on. But first, I want to mention another thing about 25 while we're talking about it is like aside from the stuff that we talked about that is interesting shift for Bitcoin, it's been an insane bull run for BPI itself. And like we have grown and matured as an organization really according to any metric you could imagine. And that's been personally that's been a pretty incredible ride. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd love to go. I've spent a few years at Bitcoin Policy Institute, a few years of my career here, and I know we're not trying to do like a complete retrospective on BPI. Maybe we should sometime. But if everyone would allow a little bit of navel gazing here at the end of the year and look back, I'm just incredibly humbled and blown away, frankly, and really really proud of every single person of our team, and not to mention all of the very generous donors and supporters from, corporate friends to individuals up and down the board that have allowed us to not just grow, but thrive in this environment. And makes me a little bit emotional, honestly, getting just looking back at even this year. And then, in addition to that, I know some people probably don't think this is cool, but we're policy nerds. We've been in politics. And so to me, having a vice president call us out by name and mention us as like doing great work, having a treasury secretary show up to the grand opening of our office space and these sorts of things is just it's frankly hard to imagine. I think, given everything we've discussed so far, I think it makes complete sense. But in a vacuum, I think it's just incredible. I mean, I think it's incredible. And so there's that. There's Ken. I'm gonna let you. I'll do the underhand pitch, and I'll let you knock it out of the park. But we launched the first of its kind Congressional Fellowship Program, and that's just getting going. That's a 2025 and a 2026 one, in my opinion. But I think that is really cool. And so, yes, Zach, there are things that we should talk about that feel like some things got left on the table, and there's some really hard things from this year. But focusing on the good things, I think there's just a lot to be really proud of, and there's a lot of people. I could spend the rest of this podcast thanking people and individuals and friends of ours that have helped us get to this place.
Do I swing?
Please do.
So yeah, I think the Congressional Fellowship is about all the story about demand for what we do. So this summer, BPI launched the Congressional Fellowship. As watchers probably don't understand. So Congress, if you are a 501c3 or an educational institution, you can send fellows to congressional offices if the primary purpose of that program is to educate and inform. So BPI thought it would be a great idea to put Bitcoiners on Capitol Hill. And the response has been remarkable. So we have an initial class of 4. We'll be announcing soon where they're going. It's not just these are congressional offices that we're working with. So we have to, be respectful of their wish to announce them. But in the new year, you'll see announcements of our initial class of 4 of 4 fellows who are being placed in congressional offices, and their entire job. I mean, these fellows will be working for the offices they're placed in, but they will be advancing Bitcoin policy. And I mean, just again, as sort of as we've been talking about for the past couple of minutes, think back to a year ago, and now we have 4 offices, and by the way, bipartisan offices. This is both parties that are willing to take BPI fellows, put them on staff, and let them run around Capitol Hill speaking in their name, because these offices, when you're a fellow in office, you will represent that congressional office, speaking in their name, talking about policies and advancing policies that benefit Bitcoin. It's an amazing shift in overall thinking in Capitol Hill. I don't think it would have been possible even just a year ago, which I think is amazing. Yeah, and in terms of the BPI side, I think BPI is again, we're a think tank, so we're different. And one of the best intros I get with new offices I talk to on Capitol Hill is, we're a 501c3, we're not an issue organization, we're here to help you understand Bitcoin. It is for them, they love it. It's very refreshing because they are, and it's not. I don't. It's not criticism. I'm not criticizing the crypto lobby and what they do. I think everybody has the right to do business, but I think BPI is succeeding because we are viewed as an honest broker, give honest perspectives on the advantages and challenges of the rise of Bitcoin digital assets. And because there are challenges, it's going to disrupt things. We do not tell our pitch is not that everything will be amazing. No, there will be disruption. There'll be changes. There'll be challenges we have to address. And I think we're doing really well in Washington because we've learned a reputation of being honest brokers. Again, as I joke, it helps you when you're pitching a good product, Bitcoin. But yeah, but again, because we're not an industry group. We are invited, I think, to talk to people where industry's not, because we've earned a reputation of being bipartisan, nonpartisan, I think is a better way to describe it. And we provide honest perspectives on a breadth of things. We don't just talk about why tokenization can change the world. No, we talk a lot about other things like monetary competition that people who talk about tokenization don't talk about. We talk about the electric grid, where and how Bitcoin mining benefits, and there are challenges, but how that benefits the growth of a stable grid. No one else talks about that because no one else can talk about that because they're doing what they do with their crypto projects. This has been a bumper year for BPI, in large part. Yes, awesome people, but also we're pitching a great product, which kind of makes it easy and also a lot of fun.
Yep. Zach, I want to circle back to you because I think you raised a good point, which is, it wasn't all, sunshine and rainbows in 2025. So, curious, kind of what's top of mind there and, what the takeaways are and if there's things we're looking to 2026 for.
Yeah, the bad stuff for 2025. The price. People had different expectations about what would happen. It's a little bit hard to come off of a year like 2024 and expect it just to go up in a straight line. But the fact that like a lot of the monetary theses played out, there's less central bank independence that there used to be. It looks like there's going to be a lot more liquidity. It looks like there's money printing on the horizon, and like the sort of investing public understood the debasement trade for the first time, and they did gold instead of Bitcoin. Like that sucks. That was bad. I think the treasury company conversation sucked a lot of the air out of the room, right? Whatever you think about treasury companies, there is so much focus, in these this year and next year are the 2 years where we have an administration that has the runway to really help us move stuff forward from a policy perspective. And we can have sort of our cypherpunk priorities, and instead we did paper Bitcoin summer. I think that was kind of a miss. I think Bitcoin culture in general, probably every class of Bitcoiners thinks it gets worse after they get involved, but it seems pretty bad. I think particularly like listening on Twitter Spaces, right? With so much attention on Bitcoin and with such of a price run up last year, I think there's a lot of room for people to sort of go out and try and be Bitcoin influencers and pick fights with each other. And I think just we as sort of a community, maybe have lost our focus a little bit. Maybe that's sort of tied in with the treasury thing. But I think even outside of that, I think the way that we debate even sort of like technical changes in Bitcoin is pretty dysfunctional and a missed opportunity. I think the outcome in both the Samurai Wallet and Tornado Cash cases was in some way disappointing. It's not
Mhm.
like it wasn't a clean sort of failure there. I think the Blanche memo is an important step forward. I think this issue has been raised for policymakers in a way that is different this year than it has in the past, and we may get sort of a fix to some of the non-custodial developer protections if we get the Clarity Act through next year. But having Bitcoin developers go to jail for writing software is certainly disappointing. Um, yeah, I think those are a few off the top, and I think that a lot of this sort of political energy. I mean, some of it is in the right place and thinking about what's good policy, but there's also just a lot of grift. I think from some folks in government and also some folks in industry who are really more looking out for sort of narrow interests instead of, I think, coming together and being like, all right, what are the most impactful wins we can get now while the iron is hot.
I think probably the first thing on the docket for 2026 is going to be market structure. So I'm curious, kind of, again, this is like our weekly market structure update, but um, curious if there's any kind of details of, there was a lot of internal discussion about, hey, we want to get this done before the end of the year. Previously they had said we want this done in September. That got pushed back. Yeah, just want to dig into like why it keeps getting pushed back. I think that's important for people to understand, um, and whether this is an early next year thing, if it's going to get carried out. Um, yeah, I think this is in terms of policy priorities, one of a couple for BPI, but want to give folks a sense of like where our heads are at on that.
No, I think you'll see market structure voted on in Q1 of 26. I know there was hope that there would be, and there I guess there could theoretically still be sort of agreed upon language for debate and overall Senate review release by the end of the year. That could still happen. Maybe will, maybe won't. Um, but I think that will. I think Q1. I think market structure will pass. As I sort of referred to earlier. And I think we're kind of lucky in that most of the discussion is not focused on there's some sort of most of the discussion is not focused on things that are directly of concern to us. Nonetheless, where the things that we care about are sort of the more arcane pieces of the bill, about developer rights, that kind of thing, that are that are the hardest to understand, the hardest to explain to Senate staff. I mean, I've Zach has like helped write many things that I've sent to Senate staffers. BPI, what do you think about this? Walk me through why DeFi matters and these sorts of things. Things that aren't necessarily directly related to Bitcoin, but that are deeply, deeply important to sort of the success of our community. I do think that we will see it voted on and passed in Q1. I don't think in January, maybe January, but Q1 for sure. And that sounds optimistic, but remember, this is supposed to be done by the end of summer. There's been a lot of there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of the Democrats are having issues with some of the conflict of interest stuff always comes up, which of course is ultimately a political issue. Um, and I think some of the Democrats, even some Republicans, have some what are honest questions about DeFi, and what that means for AML, what that means for criminal activity and sanctions evasion, that kind of thing. This is a lot of what we discuss. I unfortunately, a lot of the sort of memey ideas about sanctions and destroying the world that Elizabeth Warren has been peddling for years still linger in software protections and self custody protections, um, and require sort of deeper discussions with Senate staff and certainly right now Senate staff about what actually is the problem and how legislation could fix it. I have though. I feel pretty good that I think they understand that. Well, for example, it's very common, but what about North Korea? They ask that all the time. What can North Korea? Well, yeah, but nothing North Korea stole was about self custody or software developer rights, right? They were all everything North Korea's done on the cybersecurity side has been on the crypto side has been a cybersecurity lapse. The Bybit hack of this year, the biggest ever, was a cybersecurity lapse. And it's very easy to say, well, somehow if Americans weren't able to have self custody, that North Korea wouldn't be able to steal crypto from exchanges. It's complete bullshit. But I do think that some of the critics, I mean, I'll name names. I mean, Senator Warner's staff is very educated on this, but he's been a vocal, raising issues. Even Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, Republican, has been raising issues publicly about these things. And I think a lot of it is a function of where they sit. I think it's a function of legitimate concerns they might have and just a lack of understanding. I like the fact when an office reaches out and says, "Help us understand this," it's not my place to criticize. We love the meme. We're still early. So if we are still early and people ask me questions that, you know, maybe our listeners will say, "Well, that's stupid easy." Well, yeah, but we're still early, so let's give these people a break. And the point is to be there and answer the questions they have. Um, but I think I'm fairly confident that we'll have a reasonable bill that doesn't damage what the Bitcoin community cares about, self custody, software developer rights. I think we will have a bill that addresses and protects those important items for us in Q1. I just think it's going to be a dramatic, like everything else. Because yeah, there is. I have to say it. There's low congressional fatigue on this stuff because it's been going on for so long. Genius flew by, and now there's like you just Google it, right? There's offices saying we should do this with Genius, we should do that with Genius. So there's a little bit of a hangover and a little bit of like sort of buyer's remorse, not on Genius as a concept, but Genius in the details. And I think there's a general level of fatigue about market structure because it is a lot of it's kind of arcane. It's stuff that these offices aren't used to. It's just not. It's a new industry, and it's kind of difficult to understand. So the idea is like to plow through the fatigue and not let the sort of the interests that have been quiet, like the other BPI, the Bank Policy Institute, which hates all this stuff, not let them sort of chirp in the ear of staffers who have I understand general crypto fatigue, and turn these bills into something that that is bad for what we care about. But again, I feel pretty good that in Q1 we'll have a bill that is at least neutral, if not advantageous for our people.
Um, Zach, curious if you think there will be any new momentum on the Bitcoin Act or something of the sort in the early part of 2026, and maybe what pieces do you think need to fall in place in order for that to be viable?
I mean, I think there will be some momentum because we're going to create it. I mean, like this is the group. I don't think it's going to pass in 2026. I mean, that would be great. I just it's a long-term project. I would love to be wrong, and we're going to do our best. But getting the votes for buying 1 million Bitcoin, I think there are other ways.
Oh, you said Bitcoin Act, not market structure. Oh, I was like, oh my god, no, yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah.
My bad. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Market structure, I
like,
feel that no, that I mean
Zack
that we
Shapiro.
kind of need.
My bad, my boy.
I think not to sort of get in front of ourselves, but there. One example of another way that we've tried to sort of shift the conversation on public investment in Bitcoin at the federal level was the recent Bitcoin for America Act, where we, worked, to come up with a theme of paying Bitcoin into the reserve, getting better tax treatment. I think that listeners can expect to hear more proposals like that in 26, aside from the Bitcoin Act, which is sort of an expression of what we ultimately want to do. I think that one is, further down the line. I'd be curious everyone's sort of take on like what theme, what Bitcoin theme would you go long or short on for 26? I think 26 I think quantum is going to be a big part of the conversation. And how do we address that? I think that like, if for no other reason that people are just excited about quantum as a technology, especially younger investors are excited about this. And so it's going to come up. And I am personally convinced that like, this is something that we ought to start taking action on sooner rather than later, even if we don't have the answer now. Like this is something that needs to be taken seriously now and sort of move towards at least a consensus mechanism that we can feel comfortable with. And so I think that would be a big theme. I would go short on, I think we're going to hear less about spam next year.
That would be nice.
Inshallah, 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 inshallah.
What are you guys long and short trades for 26?
It's a good question. I think long, I think something I've noticed, I mean, this is like a personal take is, we chip away at certain things where we push really hard and it sometimes feels like, there's a little momentum and then it sort of goes flat. And then I've noticed, 6 months, 12 months later, suddenly there's an uptake, in that, on that topic or in that arena. And so I think my wild card would be a nation state competition, sort of national security side of things that we've been talking about for a long time. That seems like, there's good conversations. There's things, we're meeting with, elected officials and these things. We're putting out white papers and discussing it. And then, I think there's people who take it very seriously, but I think that maybe it can move into a more prominent conversation and discussion, not just within Bitcoin circles. And so I'm bullish there, and I'll leave it at that. I'm not bearish on anything, Zach. I'm a perma bull.
One thing I've been thinking about a little bit, I think BPI is sort of a case in point for this, but increasingly, I think we're going to see like the younger generation stepping up to the plate here, and I hear in politics land a fair amount. Hey, Gen Z is now the biggest voting bloc. Whoever dominates in the midterms and whoever dominates in 2028, right? They're gonna have to win over Gen Z, right? And I think the other thing that we saw, with Mamdani in New York is, hey, there's sort of new avenues for ideas to spread, and young people are increasingly on sort of short form content, channels, TikTok, Instagram. I'm really hopeful that 2026 is the year that both politicians kind of see Gen Z, as a really important voting block, and also the extent to which Gen Z, comes around to Bitcoin, right? I think that if there's a year for it, 2026 is probably as good as any of them. I'm thinking particularly about affordability, right? Last week we had a fun conversation towards the end about the moving benchmark for people to be at a livable income, and we were like, hey, maybe it was like $70,000, at the turn of the century, and now it's like 140,000, and people are feeling squeezed by that. Um, and we said, hey, look, Bitcoin could be an answer to that. And so I think, to the extent that Gen Z continues to feel that pressure, um, yeah, bullish on Bitcoin being, an answer to that.
So as the person furthest away from Gen Z, although as Gen Z progeny, I think the challenge with like I think you captured it well. The frustration, which frustration is obviously a sort of a high time preference kind of thing. Short form content. I think the thing that really changes the dynamic is the global monitoring competition, and shifts. And I do, and I this is what I'm bullish on. It may not be bullish for everybody, but I'm bullish on it. I'm bullish on the U.S. government making some hard choices, over monetary policy and competition over the next year. I think you see you already see sort of the there's a reason why like Stephen Myron's like dot plot is below everybody else's, and there's a reason why they're like, trying to like reform, do some banking reform and allow banks like to create more capital, because there's this general understanding, that they're going to have to change the nature of monetary plumbing, because without changing the nature of monetary plumbing, you can't do all the things that I think even everybody understands we have to do to value the dollar, get interest rates down. If we're going to reshore, if we're going to, we need to bring capital homes, if we're going to, reshore and industrialize. But that involves trade offs. And I think that you're going to see sort of I think you're going to see sort of policy moves that encourage that. And TBD. I mean, to be announced, but like, we're sort of helping some administration people think through some of these things about stablecoins and Bitcoin, and what that means for capital flows and euro dollars. Because the more you look at it, And I will say it's also back to the original premise about the realization of 25 that it is just a Ponzi. Everybody gets it. And it's kind of cool to watch Wall Street like treat it like that. Sort of it's out there in the open. But I think you look at sort of the things that Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent is talking about and doing. This is a guy who really, really understands how all these things work, and he's been very, very explicit and public about his thinking about how stablecoins and Bitcoin will assist that monetary realignment. Not that there won't be some pain, but the fact is that we are going to. I think that I think 26 will be the year where it happens. Um, where you see the Treasury and other aspects of the executive, because I don't expect much from Congress. When you see aspects of the Treasury and the executive making choices that affect capital flows, that to the advantage of stablecoins, to the advantage of we'll call it digital assets, but I don't mean Ripple. I mean stablecoins and neutral reserve assets like Bitcoin. I think you will see concrete policy decisions that work to the advantage of that to bring capital back into the fold and certainly for reshoring our capital. And I think that's going to be a radical change. And I think it's everything that Gen Z thinks they want. I don't. I mean, it's again, it's arcane stuff, and I don't think people know what they want. But I think these are the things that have to happen. And I give like Secretary Bessent a lot of credit. Like he is, I mean, this is a man who's lived his whole life in the deep end of the pool. The fact he's able to bring perspectives as a policymaker, as a senior policymaker, and start moving levers of government to do these things is it's remarkable. I think he is the most transformative in the administration. I think Secretary Bessent is the most transformative figure in the administration because he is. I mean, he's a man that he understands as well as anybody the monetary plumbing, and he also understands the advantages of stablecoins and Bitcoin. And he is like, I think you'll see him aggressively do things in the new year that to the benefit of that, but will radically remake how capital flows through global markets. My prediction.
Bullish on Bessent.
Bullish on Bessent for sure.
I'm gonna drop a little alpha here.
Whoa.
So get out your
Is Bessent in your house? Is he like is he a cameo?
He's actually, yeah. This is his banjo. Thank you, Scott, for letting me borrow your instrument here. But no, I'm bullish on the Bitcoin Policy Summit for 2026.
Damn.
I am super
Am I
excited
invited?
let's talk after the podcast. It'll be fine. You and I'll talk. We'll figure it out. But it's going to be the fourth annual Bitcoin Policy Summit, and
The fourth turning summit. I love it.
We haven't
dude.
officially announced anything yet, so plausible deniability. Everybody needs to sign an NDA who's listening to this, but I think it's going to be really exciting. I think it's going to be really neat, and so I'm really bullish on that. Again, perma bull on all things.
Hell yeah. One other thing that I think we should talk about, looking into 2026, the way I see it is if 2025 was sort of the year that, um, both Bitcoin and crypto really kind of came into the limelight, particularly in Washington, D.C. and politics, right? That created a lot of opportunity, right? We saw Tether come back to the United States really in force in 2025. I was talking to Harry at CleanSpark, and he said, "Hey, we were doing fine in 2023 and 2024, but we really felt like this year we had the freedom to do what we thought was right. We didn't have to worry about, sort of overzealous regulators, and that opened us up to really kind of do the things that we wanted to do." And so, yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious the extent to which we think in 2026 companies, will move to the United States. Companies that are already in the United States will feel more free to work on the things they've been working on. I think Tether is a really interesting example. So, I want to dig into that a little bit. But yeah, I think I'm super bullish on, capital and companies being in the United States, being happy to be in the United States and having the United States government say, "Hey, we support you. We want to listen to you. We want to, we want to make this environment as friendly as possible." Um, and I'm curious what BPI's role is in making that happen because, there are things that we would like to see from a policy perspective. Uh, we also, we want to make sure the industry here in the United States is thriving, and that's core to what we're doing. So yeah, let's kick off on that.
No, so I think 2026 is the year of the discussion of monetary realignment. I think if you read the president's national security strategy, I mean, it's like it is definitely out with the old and in with the new. He kicked Europe to the curb, and what is Europe? Europe represents the old sort of model of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. capital markets. Um, is it with the extreme focus on Western Hemisphere, and I think that um, the Western Hemisphere discussion is a stablecoin Bitcoin discussion at its core. That this is where you have the most competition for against the Chinese tech stack. This is where you have competition for monetary dominance. I mean, a lot of these countries are commodity producers that are sort of you're resource wealthy. And look at Brazil, for example. But these are a lot of these countries are or energy wealthy, like Paraguay. Well, Paraguay is blessed, like other countries, with tremendous hydropower. So I think that 2026 is the question of it is the year of the realization of the monetary dominance strategy, and what that looks like in the evolution of competition with the emergence of sort of the parallel system that China's building. Um, and I think that Bitcoin and stable coins, because I still think they're one and the same. In terms of like in terms of policy, I will sort of like make that distinction. But I think that 2026 is the year where the United States leans into digitizing uh, digitizing money flows in areas of interest, and that is parts of Southeast Asia, but certainly Latin America. And I think you'll see more from the administration over the next few months about what that looks like for Western Hemisphere competition. Just read the national security strategy. It's only like 25 pages. Just stick it in Grok, and it can be shorter. But any Bitcoiner who reads that it will be very quickly apparent that monetary competition is a fundamental piece of that. And if you know what you know about this administration, it makes sense that monetizing euro dollars and offshore money into stablecoins and pulling money out of the sort of renminbi gold circular system into a reserve neutral asset like Bitcoin makes perfect sense.
Ken, I'm curious that's a really good point. Is there is there a world where like industry and thinking particularly about people who are in our orbit, that they come into play on these sort of national security questions that aren't maybe directly sort of stablecoin or monetary realignment adjacent? Like I'm thinking about Bitcoin miners or I'm thinking about like what Square's been doing with Bitcoin as a payments tool. Yeah, I'm just curious about that.
I do. I mean, I think the administration has made it clear that they are trying to leverage public-private partnerships for the advancement of policy priorities. And I think you'll see more of that. I mean, we're in a world where the old days of like dishing out checks to countries is over because I think it's pretty tough to make the case that dishing out checks made a difference, certainly in terms of like advantages for U.S. foreign policy. No, but I think the administration is going to lean on the private sector in public-private partnerships to achieve those goals. Um, because that I think well, I don't know how else you would do that. But again, this is harnessing the power of U.S. capital, intellectual capital, and using it to secure advantageous relations and policy outcomes in parts of the world. But for me, Latin America is the easiest example. They're already, and if you look like in Latin America, they're already even small companies like SAS Mining, right? They're small company doing great things in Latin America. But I do think you will see an effort to sort of link. I mean, you can't if you're going to have a Western Hemisphere strategy, You have to have a whole Western Hemisphere strategy, and that not doesn't mean just kicking China and Russia out of the Western Hemisphere. It means building trade routes. It means building comms routes. It means building routes for flows of capital, and that necessarily needs to be digital because when you're building, the reason why China's been successful in these places is because they're building rails where there are no rails. We're not talking about building rails in Italy. We're talking about building rails in countries that don't have widespread rails. If you're going to compete, you need to build parallel rails, rails that make sense. I think this is where you'll see the administration over the next few months lean into public-private partnerships that achieve that goal. I still think the assumption is that if American companies doing good work, it remains in American interests and national interests, and I think you'll see the administration lean into that over the next few months.
Zach, Stephen, just want to kind of reiterate the question here. To what extent do you think 2026 is an opportunity for companies in our industry to engage with the administration? And to what extent is BPI going to be sort of involved in making sure that we're not the only voice, speaking to these particular issues?
Yes, there's 2026 will be perhaps the last best opportunity to interface with the administration before they're seen as sort of lame duck. I think what we learned in 25 is the administration is willing to move faster than Congress is on digital asset policy, and that will definitely be a focus of ours.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. I think that the last year is a lot of there's been some speed dating, with the industry. I think there's a lot of like us getting to know the administration and vice versa, and so sort of what I've heard, this summer with you know with different uh, pieces of legislation. We've learned a lot, right? We have learned a lot about who's where on what issues and what, where people aren't and allies and friends and all this sort of thing. And so I think that politically we've learned a lot. And I think relationally we've learned a lot. I think there's been a lot of education. A lot of people have had to learn a ton in a very condensed time period. And so that's part of what we've seen. And Ken, what you were talking about earlier with like the different tiers of conversation discussion that you have with certain offices and certain staff members within those offices. And so there's been a massive leveling up, but we've been doing that while we've been working on things. And so I think that's what I'm most sort of optimistic about there, and why I'm looking toward 2026. I think with BPI, our team, whether it's Ken here, whether it's Connor Brown, who's a recent addition, and Zach, and of course Grant and David, the entire team, being our footprint there in Washington, and just sort of charging the hill every day, and then bringing a lot of friends and partners along, or then bringing us along. I think we all have different relationships, we all have different points of contact, and so I think that there's the industry sees the opportunity, and sort of the necessity of the moment, and I think that the administration and Congress sees that as well, and so I think we have common ground there, to figure this out, to get as much done as soon as possible, and to sort of concretize the wins that we've had already in place and get those more firmly established, right?
Okay, final question. We'll do a little lightning round here. What is the number one thing? Like, if you could wish anything, there's a genie, and we get 3 wishes, one for each of you all. Um, what's the one thing you would wish for 2026? As a Bitcoiner, put your BPI hat away. What's the number one thing on the policy front that you would like to see for Bitcoin?
Damn, Zico, that's kind of deep because you're asking me to commit to 365 days of of what I think.
All right,
I
you want me
defer
to start?
Shapiro. Not if yeah, yes, we do want you to start.
All right. I guess we get 4 wishes. I think one really positive thing at the end of this year was, the sort of unified campaign to do a de minimis exemption for Bitcoin. We saw, Block and Cash App, like the whole sort of block ecosystem rally around, hey, we want to make Bitcoin everyday money. And a de minimis exemption, I think, would be a major unlock to that extent. And so I would absolutely love to see that personally. I will say, I generally am like, oh, do I want to spend my Bitcoin here? I don't want to, I don't have to like write down my cost basis at the moment I, sold it or whatever it may be. Um, and just avoid any kind of ambiguity there. I think that would be just a massive win.
It's hard to pick one thing, because there's so many different sectors, right? I think that obviously, I think Bitcoin's going to continue to do its thing regardless. So that's not one of them. But I think that for Bitcoiners, um, it's when we look at the list of wins and what was good about this year, and what was not good about this year. I think that some people would you know probably they wouldn't be as passionate about some of the wins as we are on the policy side, and probably would be more passionate about some of the hard things in 2025. So I think what I would like to see is whether it's through clarity or otherwise, some of these protections of software developers be put into law. I'd like to see these things changed and some tables flipped over there. And then I'd like to see some pardons go out for certain developers. And I think that one, I think that would be awesome. And then two, I think that would be fantastic for the community. And I think that I want everyone when we whether it's a strategic Bitcoin reserve, or whether it's Bitcoin Act, or whether it's whatever, all these different things we've been talking about, that would be great to have for 2026. I want everybody to be in position to celebrate that, and I just don't think everybody is right now. I think if Bitcoin goes to $250,000, I want everybody to be in position to be really excited about that and to celebrate that, and I just don't think everybody is right now. I think that there's some people that are really hurting. I think there's people that are really scared. And so I'd like for that to no longer be the case before we get some of these other things, or as we get them, just because I kind of want everybody at the party, so to speak, if that makes sense.
I'd say in terms of achievable, the Clarity Act passing with developer protections, that's the most important thing going into the year. I think it's doable. And then if we really have a genie, why not get the Bitcoin Act through?
Yeah, for me, I would say that for me, if I could snap one thing, it would be BRCA, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. Whether it's part of clarity, but whether it's part of market structure or not. And I think sort of a secondary wish would be increased use of Bitcoin as collateral for debt. I think that's a huge unlock. You saw the CFTC this week, now approve the use of Bitcoin for collateral for derivatives, which is kind of big, and I think that's just the next step. But ultimately, on a bigger level, I think kind of what Steven said. I kind of want like Bitcoin to. I kind of want Bitcoin to infuse into the bloodstream of the rest of the system, because as I've read like Strauss and Howe, like I kind of believe the foreturning story. And I do think Bitcoin, it's going to happen, but I do think Bitcoin is a great bumper. Pick your word, bumper, knee pads, whatever you want, for people that own it to get through that transition. And maybe that transition is peaceful. At the end of the day, I think of, I do have a Gen Z child. I do want this, whatever the new world is, whatever the realignment looks like, the realignment's coming. And I can't say I don't think it's coming, because I spend all my time here talking about with government officials what realignment looks like. And they're agreeing, yes, there's realignment coming. How do we make it advantageous? I want that realignment to be frankly beneficial for everybody. But I certainly want my friends and family to get through it in a good way. I genuinely believe, cool as it sound, I genuinely believe that people that hold Bitcoin, and if Bitcoin is part of institutional frameworks and thinking, that it adds bumpers to that transition period, which is it will be inevitably bumpy. But if you have knee pads and elbow pads on, maybe those bumps are a little less traumatic. And that for me is why I do what I do. And I desperately hope that, 'cause maybe 2026, a year from now, we have more clarity what this transition looks like. And I hope that Bitcoin is able to do its thing and make that transition better for everybody that owns it and people that maybe own it in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's well said. Um, And maybe a moonshot could be repealing the Bank Secrecy Act. What do you think about that?
Oh, hells yeah. A grotesque violation of. Here's the thing: if you don't think that your BSA affects you, you just don't know it. It does. Trust me, people. You have been harmed by the BSA. You just don't know it.
There you go. All right. That's gonna wrap us up for 2025 here. Yeah, go ahead.
If I may be so bold, and maybe we can edit this and put it at the beginning of the show, but we're talking year end, and as the director of advancement and development, we are a nonprofit, and so if you're planning your year-end giving, Zach Cohen, I'm looking at you, buddy. As you're planning your year-end giving, please keep us in mind. We'll put it to good use, and we need small donors, we need big donors, and if you're a billionaire out there, call me. But we really would appreciate your support. To those who do support us year in and year out, thank you. But we would humbly ask for you to consider us in your year-end giving. So yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, we can hopefully get a link dropped in the description of the YouTube video for our donate page. So if you feel so inclined, that would be much appreciated. So all right, that's gonna be a wrap. We'll see everyone in 2026. Thanks, gentlemen.
Peace.
Thanks, Zach.